All right, guys, let's get to work creating. Three things we're going to make. We're going to make a new aggro range for our enemies so they're not constantly on the attack. They will only attack when a player is detected within range. We are also going to add a spawner system, and we're going to make that spawner destructible, giving us another layer of gameplay. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we are going to create an item that essentially will gatekeep or block players from moving beyond until they have successfully destroyed a target object. So it's going to be a very a neat item that will leave some customization open for the designer to decide whether it will be this creature or this object that gets destroyed. All right, so let's create the aggro range. So the first thing we'll do is we'll add this to our enemy base. So I've already got mine open, so it should be in your content drawer under blueprint, character, the enemy base, and we'll go find our enemy base. Now, some of this should be pretty self-explanatory. If you spend just a few moments thinking about it and you've been following along up to this point, you should be able to determine like what components you might need to pull this off. Obviously, we're going to need some kind of collider in order to trigger or detect a player in range. So we can go ahead and we can add a sphere collider. Okay. And we'll call this Aggrosphere. Okay. And then you'll want to set this Aggrosphere size up to some reasonable size range. I would probably wager close to like 400 or 500. Something like around a 500 range would pretty much ensure that your player is detected by the creature the moment the creature appears on screen. So if you're looking for something like that. But we can make this sphere adjustable. So let's create a variable. And we will call this variable, let's just call this variable set aggro range. Or rather just aggro range. Okay, and this will be a float. Okay, let's create another variable called target in range. All right, and this will also be, no, this will be a Boolean. Okay, so these are the two floats we're going to need, aggro range and target in range. All right, so we can compile and save. We can go to our event graph. And we need to locate the begin play, of which we don't have one in here. So you can search for it. Now, it's possible you already have an event begin play here in your blueprint graph, because by default, the blueprint graph would have started with one, but I always tend to delete them when I don't need them right away. But they're easy to bring back. Just right-click, search for them, and you can bring back the event begin play. Okay. Once we have the event begin play, first we're going to need a reference to our aggrosphere. And then we're going to set sphere radius. And then we can hook up the event begin play. So we have the ability to grab our sphere radius, grab the aggro range variable that we made, and we will get that. We can plug that in here. So by default, I've got mine set to 500. Okay. But since I've made mine instance editable or whatnot, then I could officially technically spawn in an enemy or just manually place an enemy and give them like a special aggro range, or give different enemy types different ranges, such as like goblins or whatever else you might add. Now, perhaps just for testing purposes, you may want to lower that range to something like 100. So then you'll really see that the enemy doesn't move until the player comes within range. So now what we're going to do is we've got this target in range variable that we're going to use to do a tag check. So this will check specifically for the hero itself, so that our hero is the only thing that will set off aggro and not like other things. So for that, we'll go to our hero blueprint. So our hero. And inside of class defaults, right? So in your hero blueprint, in class defaults, in details, search for tag. And down here it says actor advanced tags. We're going to add a tag. We'll add hero. Okay. Then we can go back to our enemy base. And very simply, we need to just create the overlap event for the aggro sphere. So if we grab our aggro sphere, we can right click in here and we can add an event and we can do on component begin overlap. All right. And then down here, off of the on begin overlap, the other actor, we're going to check for actor as tag. Okay. And then we can just type in hero. All right. So it's going to check for the other actor to be tag of hero. So anything we give the tag hero to will trigger aggro. Then we can pull off of here and grab ourselves a nice branch. And the branch gives us the condition connection to the tag. Tag systems are really fun and easy. And then we can set target in range to true. So off of true, if the player is tagged true, then that means a target is in range. So we will switch that to true, which gives us a nice new condition that we can use, again, right here in our enemy base under the walk towards setup that we did. And if we just look really closely here, we have already a line created for the different conditions of walking towards, where we check if they're alive or if they're stunned or not stunned rather, then they can walk towards. So what we can do is just we bring in the get target in range, add a plus. If the target in range is set to true as well, now there'd be 3 conditions for walk towards. Okay, now if you wanted to have your aggro be something that the player could escape, you could also just reverse this to reset to target not in range anymore, or check for target not in range. But I'm going to leave mine to just once aggroed, always aggroed. Okay, so now we need to create a spawner for our enemies. Now, just real quick, so if I go back here and I hit play, I should be able to get into the range of the turkey without getting any aggro from them. And if I walk closer, then you'll see clearly they start to walk towards me. Okay, and now they can be. Let's create our spawner. So we're going to go to our blueprint folder, and I'll just create a new folder called spawner. And inside of here, we'll right click, we'll create a new blueprint class of actor. We'll call this BP underscore spawner base, because we'll do another inheritance setup so we can have different items be different spawners. Let's open this up, and I'm going to dock this here. Now with our brand new blueprint, we're just going to need to add some components. I mentioned before that this thing is going to be destructible, so we can go ahead and just add our health component. So this will just give it the ability to take damage, because all those systems are already set up. We're going to want a paper sprite. Paper sprite. Okay, we'll rotate this paper sprite to 270. And I'm not sure if I have a sprite I can use right now for the spawner. I'll just do I'll steal a sprite from the despawn, and we'll just have it be like that, just for my demonstration. But you can put any sprite you want here. I'll pick a slightly better one. There we go. And you can pick any sprite you want. Okay. So we got health, so we're going to need a collider. So let's do some box collision. So we can, and we'll call this the hurt box. All right, so now we got a place to damage for the enemy spawn. And we're going to add a sphere collider. Sphere collision. And this is going to be our spawn zone. Okay, so we're going to have an area that the monsters can spawn in, not just anywhere they want on the map, but within range of the spawner itself. Okay, let's make sure we go to our sprite and go down and remove collision from the sprite. So collision preset on the sprite will be just no collision. Okay, hurt box, we're going to go to the overlap, or sorry, the collision preset, and we're going to hit or add our hit detection preset that we made. All right, and now we're going to make some variables real fast. First one we'll make will be called enemy to spawn. Now this will be an array. And a reference to our enemy base. So we're going to search for BP underscore enemy base. BP underscore enemy base, but we're going to choose class reference, not object reference this time. Class reference. Okay. In class reference, we're going to put instance editable. All right. And then the next variable that we'll make will be the active enemy. And this will be a reference to the same blueprint. So BP underscore enemy base. This will be the object reference. Okay. Now we got to do something real cool here for the first time. We're going to do enemy to spawn. And in here we got the base and it's a class reference. But we're going to do this little drop down over here with our variable clicked. And we're going to switch it to an array. Right, so the active enemy and the enemy to spawn will be an active array. The best way I could describe an array is like a pool or a list of all the different things. Okay, so we can remove and add items to this list. We can count the number of things inside of this list. We can do a lot of things from a list of objects. So in this case, the enemy to spawn will be the pool of enemies to spawn. And then the active enemy will be the list that we keep of the active enemies so that we can limit the amount of enemies spawned. Okay, and then we'll just create a variable real quick called spawn height. This will just be a float. We don't really need this one, but why not? Okay, so now real quick, we're going to go back to our enemy base and we're going to make another variable over here that we will call owning spawner. And it'll be an object reference to our new spawner. So BP spawner base, object reference. Okay. Now this variable we want to make instance editable and expose on spawn. Okay, and now we can go back to our spawner base. And inside of our spawner base, we're going to create a function. We'll go to function, we'll hit plus. We will call this function spawn enemy. So this will be the function that spawns our enemies. Okay. Now, really simply, we know we're going to be doing a spawn actor from class. So that part, kind of not a surprise, right? Now the class, we are going to add an input for the class here on the enemy spawner side. for the spawn enemy. We'll put the class there. Now the real challenge here is the spawn location, because we want to have our spawn location work with a spawn zone. So let's just grab our spawn zone, and inside of spawn zone, we're going to get component bounds. Now this gives us access to the area of the collider. Gives us an origin and the box extent. Okay. So inside of this, we'll just do random point in bounding box. Okay, so not literally a box in this case, but there we go. Okay, and then the extent will be the half size. And then we can split this struct right here. We can get the XYZ values. We can also split this one. And then we'll pull off of the transform and we'll do a make vector. Like so. And very simply put, our X and Y, because we're doing a 2D title, will plug into this vector. But we've got this little Z. Well, that's not a problem. Because we've got spawn height, which should not be an array, just for the record. And then the spawn height will set to, I believe, is 88. And then we can just bring in this spawn height. Just plug that in here. Okay. We're not quite done here yet, but we'll have to come back here in a sec. So let's go to our event graph. Okay. We're going to need the event begin play, but not just yet. First, we're going to create a custom event that we will call new spawn. All right. And off of this, for the spawn, we're going to create a delay. And off of this delay, we're going to do a custom, or sorry, random float in range. And I'm going to do something like between 3 and say 6. Okay. Oh, not 60, just 6. All right. So what this is going to do is before a new enemy spawns, there'll be a short delay before it happens that will take place between 3 and 6 seconds. Okay. Now, if you remember, since we're working with an array, then we're going to use a for each loop. And inside of the for each loop, we're going to get the enemies to spawn. Okay. And then we can call our function of spawn enemy. And then the array element will be the class. So that's that input we put in our function. All right, so now if we go back to our function, we plugged in the class. Now we're going to need to use the active enemy. Let's get our active enemy and add it. Array add, make sure it's utilities array add. To our active enemy. Sorry, let's pull off of this return value. Search for add. Make sure it's an array add. And plug in the active enemy. Okay, now we got a little bit of an error here. No problem, we're going to fix that. Where we have our error here, we're going to go to our enemy base, make sure we've created our owning spawner. I made a reference to our BP spawner blueprint that we made. And back in our BP spawner blueprint, now we'll click on the enemy spawn function at the beginning here. And under class, we need to change this from just an actor to our BP underscore enemy base class reference. Okay. And then we compile and save. Now let's just delete these and let's just pull off of here again. And if we search for add an array, like so, that should give us the proper reference we need. So we'll bring in our active enemy, plug that in, compile and save again. And if we refresh here, refresh node, we should see owning spawner. And the owning spawner will be self. Okay. This can be a little bit tricky and weird. So literally like keep unplugging and plugging it back in and trying it until you can see owning spawner. Now we're going to go to our event graph where we started our new spawn. And we're just going to make sure all the pieces are there. Perfect. Now we can actually call our new spawn event off of event begin play. Okay, so let's just go ahead and we're just going to add a delay here to start. We'll just do something like 5 seconds or just 5. And then we can call the new spawn event. So this will just trigger like enemies spawning at the start of our game. So the function, when an enemy is spawned, they spawn in at this location and they get added to the active enemy array. So now when the enemy gets killed, we want to remove that enemy from that array. We're going to create another function that we will call the spawn defeated. Okay. And inside of spawn defeated, we'll create an input called enemy to remove or spawn to remove. I'm trying to keep on to remove. I'm trying to keep the difference between enemy and spawn separate, because a spawned enemy will act differently than just a standard placed in world enemy. Okay, and this will be just a regular object reference to our enemy base. Okay, so we'll bring in active enemy, get our active enemy, and we added it in spawn enemy, so we're going to remove it from the dead enemy. So we're just going to remove array item. Okay, and then now if we also grab another active enemy, we can get the list of items in this array, or rather the number of items in the array, which we'll do here with just length. This just tells us how many things are in this array. Okay, and if it's less than or equal to 0. All right, so this will allow us to have a system, if we want, where our spawners can have a different cap of enemies. So a spawner will be allowed to have 2 or 3 or 12 spawns if they want. Okay, so that would be changed by this number here. In any case, if you want to, that's where you would do that. And now we're just going to do a branch. And we just check for the condition. Okay, so very simply explained, enemy gets defeated. They get removed from our spawn list. And then if we want to trigger a new spawn, we need to check the length. And in this case, if there's no enemies spawned from this spawner, then we can go true and do a new spawn. New spawn. Trigger new spawn. Okay, so back in our enemy base, we've got the event destroyed. We're checking for a valid get. pull off of owning spawner to get our new function of spawn defeated. And the target of the spawn defeated is get a reference to self. All right, so if we were to now want to test this, we need to go into our spawn base, click on the enemy to spawn, and add a default value here. And we can spawn whatever enemy we like. In my case, I'll make it the turkey. And if we come back to our level, now we just need to add a spawner in here. I'll just use my spawner base. Hit play. And I'll deal with this turkey real quick. And shortly we should see a turkey spawn in from there. There we go. And when I get too close, it will be aggroed. And they are destroyed. Okay. Yeah, so you could create with the spawner base, you could create different spawners that would let you have different spawner types. That spawn only turkeys or have random spawns or whatever floats your boat. Okay, but now we need to make our spawner destructible. Okay, so this shouldn't be too crazy, right? So we're just going to do the same thing with this spawner as we did with our enemies, which means we'll just do an event for any damage. Check for any damage. Okay, we'll grab our BPC health component, which gives us access to our decrease health variable or function, sorry. And then the damage will be plugged into the damage. Now we just need to check for our character data. Get character data. Off of the character data, we will break the character data, and then we will just check for if not alive. We'll do a branch. If they're not alive, that would mean they're true. Okay, and then we could destroy actor. I suppose you could just leave it like without the not and go off the false condition, but it can get confusing that way. Now you can, in between here, you can add a spawn VFX explosion if you like, or whatever. Get actor location. But in the meantime, one last thing I forgot to mention, go to your spawner base and the hurt box, because we're playing 2D here, you're going to want to make sure that hurt box is fairly large on the Z, so that no matter where it is in your game, it'll be something that can be hit. Okay, so now if we go play, if I grab my character, I should be able to destroy the spawner with an arrow. Okay, the spawner is immune to sword attacks currently, but you're welcome to go set that up. It should be set up the exact same way as sword damage is calculated from our enemies. All right, so with that, our spawner now works and everything regarding that is set up. So the last thing we're going to do is fairly simple, is we're going to create like a gated object, a thing that basically says this thing will forever be in your way unless you destroy something that we decide. Okay, so we're going to start with going back to our content drawer, and we will create ourselves just another folder of, like, you know, stuff or whatever you want to call it. Okay, we'll create a new blueprint class actor. We will call this BP, and we'll just call it a gate because functionally that's all it's going to be, is something that we can use to control progression. Okay. All right. Now the only thing our gate really needs is going to be just like a paper sprite. So we'll add a paper sprite. Of course, we'll rotate it 270 because it's a top-down game. And again, I don't really have a whole lot going on in here for sprites. Let's just say it's a gem, okay? I'll just put the gem in there as my gated object. So In a perfect world, you'd have an actual like fence or a piece of stone or a giant door perhaps, or whatever you want to put. That would be the destructible item. All right, now we are going to create a variable, and we're going to call this variable key object. Okay, so because this is going to function essentially like a door that blocks, then there's going to be an object that will act as our key, right? That will, once destroyed, it will, this thing will disappear. Okay, we're going to make that variable instance editable. That's super important for us. Now we can go to our event graph, and this is going to get pretty simple. We're just going to destroy these two. We only need the event begin play. Okay, and on begin play, we are going to bind event to on destroy. All right, so this will bind this object to another object, and when that object is destroyed, this will do something. It will do a thing, and the thing it's going to do is destroy itself. Right, so we'll grab a reference to our key object. That's the thing that when it gets destroyed, this will trigger. In the event, we will call this on key. Sorry, it'll be a custom event that we are going to call on key destroyed. All right, and then when this event triggers, we'll do just a little slight delay here. Just like 0.2 is fine, and just destroy the actor. That should in theory be it. So if we now put this DP gate object, for which I'll just do a quick save, we just grab this gate object. That's just a gem that's there, right? I'll delete these gems here so it's not confusing. Now remember, that gem is just a placeholder asset for myself. Now if I select this gem, remember we made the key object instance editable, which means if we look here in the defaults, we got key object. And now I can select an object that would be destroyed to make this object disappear. So I grab this little eyedropper, I can actually just come into my viewport and select, say, this spawner. See, here we get a reference to the spawner. Save, and if we play, now if I come down here, you can see the gem clearly. If I fire arrows at the spawner, spawner destroys. 0.2 seconds later, the gem destroys. Okay, now if the player does nothing, you can set up collision on this object so that the player can't pass through. And then you could hide an object behind them. Right? All right, thanks so much, everybody. And stick around. We'll have more videos coming.